So for our next example, again, we are solving by graphing. So we want to get it into that y equals mx plus b, just like we did in our previous problem. So we're going to take our first equation here. We've got negative 8x plus 8y equals 24. And again, the same process. Every time we want to solve for y, we want to move our x first. So we're going to add 8x to both sides. Then we're going to get 8y equals 8x plus 24. And then we can come through here and divide everybody through by that 8. Reducing that down, we're going to get y equals 1x plus 3. And again, just to remind ourselves what we're looking at here, remember that this 1 in front of the x is our slope. And when we're doing this by hand, he is 1 over 1. Remember, slope is always written as a fraction, so we can talk about the fact that this goes up 1 and then to the right 1. And this plus 3 is our y-intercept. And remember, again, we're talking about this by hand. This is the point 0, comma 3. Now we're going to do the exact same thing with our second equation, negative 3x plus 3y equals 9. Again, we want to add the 3x to both sides. So we're going to end up with 3y equals 3x plus 9. And one more step here and we'll get our y by itself. We need to divide everybody through by that 3 in front of our y value so we can get y by itself. And we've got y equals 1x plus 3. Again, looking at this, the slope of the line is 1 over 1. And our y-intercept is 0, comma 3. Again, for our slope, this means we're going up 1 and to the right 1. And even before we start to graph this, if you'll notice, if you look at these two equations, once we've solved them for y, you'll notice they actually have the same slope and they have the same y-intercept. So that kind of gives us a hint onto what it's going to look like when we graph these. But let's go ahead and go down to our answer area here. And remember, when we put our answer into our homework, it's going to be a 1 here for our slope, and then a 3 here for the y-intercept. Same thing for our second line. We had a 1 for our slope and a 3 for our y-intercept. And like we've talked about, if you're doing your homework online, it's going to go ahead and graph those for you, but if we're doing it by hand, which I'm doing right now, we need to actually graph these two lines. So starting with our first line here, the y equals 1x plus 3, I'm going to go up 3. And then my slope tells me I'm going to go up 1 and to the right 1, so up 1 to the right 1. And again, I can do that multiple times. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to draw my straight line across. And there's my first line of y equals 1x plus 3. Now when I go to graph my second line, you'll notice I have the exact same formula here. So my y-intercept is still at 0. I'm going to go up 1 to the right 1, and again up 1 to the right 1, and draw my line, which is going to end up being the exact same line as my first one. So I'm really only going to see the one line on my graph because they're the same thing. And remember earlier when we were talking about our possible solutions, if they come out to be the exact same line, we have an infinite number of solutions, and we do not need to write anything in here for those two boxes because we don't have a single point that's the answer. We have too many points that we can't even name them all. So again, for our final example here, we're going to again solve these two lines by graphing. So we need to take each one of them individually and solve them for y. So we've got 8x plus 8y equals 24. We should get really used to this. We're going to again subtract our 8x, moving our x out of our way. So we get our y by itself on the left-hand side. So we're going to have 8y equals negative 8x plus 24. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to divide everybody through by 8. So y is going to equal negative 1x plus 3. Again, looking at this, remember that this guy is your slope, and he is negative 1 over positive 1, so this means we're going to go down 1, and then we're going to go to the right 1. And our y-intercept again is that point 3, so this is going to be 0, comma 3. Now we're going to do the same thing for our second line, x plus y equals -9. And really the only thing we have to do here is we need to subtract that x from both sides. So we get y equals -x minus 9. Now right here when we're looking at the slope, it is going to be -1 over +1. Remember, if there's not a number in front of your variable, there's always a 1 there. And so this again is going to go down 1 and to the right 1. And then our y-intercept here is going to be the point 0, -9. Notice we didn't have to go any further because once we moved the x, my y was by itself. It didn't have a coefficient that I needed to divide by. Had that been a negative y, I would have needed to divide by a negative, but that wasn't the case here, so we just get to stop after we move the x. Again, for your homework, when you plug this in, we need to make sure we plug in the right values here. So for our first line, we had a slope of -1 and a y-intercept of 3. For our second line, we had a slope of -1 and a y-intercept of -9. You do need to make sure that you put that negative in when you do your homework. It's automatically plus, so we need to acknowledge that it's a -9. Again, I want you to look at this and notice something. Here my slopes are actually the same value, but my starting points or my y-intercepts are going to be different values, and that's going to change up our graph a little bit. So let's see what that looks like when we graph those. Again, starting with my y-intercept, I'm going to graph my first line here, the -1x plus 3. So I'm going to go up to 3, which is going to be right here. And again, my slope is -1 over +1, so that's going to be down 1 and to the right 1. And I'm going to do it one more time just to get me 3 nice straight points there. Helps me draw my line. I'm going to cheat and use my triangle here. And there is the graph of y equals -1x plus 3. So now let's do the second one where we have -1x minus 9. So this time my y-intercept is -9, so I'm going to come down here, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm going to go down 1 to the right 1. Notice that I've ran out of room on my graph. So if I want to do another point, I need to do the opposite movement of my slope. So we went down 1 to the right 1. So I'm going to go back to my y-intercept. I'm going to go up 1 to the left. So anytime I run out of room on a graph and I want to do an extra point, I can always do the opposite movement of my slope. So if it's down and to the right, it's up and to the left. And again, draw my line between those 2 points. And you'll notice that these 2 lines happen to be parallel. And if you'll remember, one of our options was being parallel, and that is they have no solution because they never cross each other. And again, we don't need to put anything in those boxes because there is no point where these 2 lines touch each other. They actually are parallel and have no common points.